We can observe a tree in the forest as an incredible work of God's artistic hand. And so we can enjoy it. And then we can also use that same tree to craft a guitar, to make music, or to build shelter. So to me, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to just echo that in my own small way, that what I make is made of use and enjoyment.
Hello, and welcome to the Shifting Culture podcast, in which we have conversations about the culture we create and the impact we can make. I'm your host, Joshua Johnson. Today, I'm excited to welcome you to this conversation with Charlie Peacock. Charlie is a gifted musician, producer, and storyteller whose life and art intertwine in the most captivating way. In this episode, we're going to dive deep into the roots and rhythms that have shaped Charlie's remarkable journey. We'll uncover the hidden history of his family's racial identity, explore the formative experiences that forged his singular musical talent, and trace the sacred dance between his spirituality and artistry. This is a winding improvisational odyssey filled with moments of reckoning, redemption, and the irrepressible drive to create. And in sharing it with us, Charlie invites us to reflect on our own roots, to listen to the rhythms that course through our own veins, and to consider how the very things that make us who we are might also be the wellspring of our most profound expressions. So get ready, because we're about to embark on a journey through the landscape of a life fully, beautifully lived. So join us as we discover roots and rhythms. Here's my conversation with Charlie Peacock. Charlie, welcome to Shifting Culture. It is an honor to have you on. Thank you for joining me.
Well, thank you, Joshua, for having me on. Appreciate it.
Really excited to get into your book, Roots and Rhythm, A Life in Music, and the life that you have created and lived as an artist and somebody that is rooted in family. And I'd love to start with some of these roots.
Sure,
Your
you bet.
life is a tree, and you were rooted in a specific family, place, and
Yes,
time. And you
yes.
write in your very beginning of your book, I like this sentence. It says, "We're all swaying in the place of family, place, and time."
Mhm.
So take me into it. How has your roots informed your life as an artist?
Like many Americans who have discovered something about their ancestry that was really unexpected, I'm one of those people. So I lived, most of my adult life until I was in my early 40s, believing that I was a white person who naturally, with the surname Ashworth, which for your listeners is my actual legal name, that I was from Britain. And that was just sort of the story that I lived in my head for many years. I knew that I came from obviously from immigrants, but came from also a migrant culture, and that my grandparents both moved a lot for work. And so that I had this stream of, coming from Virginia to South Carolina to Texas, Louisiana, to Oklahoma, to California. And even as close as my mother's generation, when she was a little girl, she moved with her family to California as a part of the great, Oklahoma migration to California and to work in the fruit. So I knew that I had this very modest migrant background. But what I didn't know is that, one side of my family has been here since the early 1600s. So what the real story has been is that for the last 100 years, I've lived as a white person. But prior to that, my father's side of the family were all Black, designated mulatto, or mixed race. And so when you think in terms of 120 years ago, all my grandmothers, going back, all my great grandmothers were all Black. And so going back to the 1600s. So that's a huge shift in a sense of identity. Not, as I often tell people, that doesn't make me Black. That doesn't make me having lived the Black experience in America in my lifetime. But it is my ancestry and it is my story. And and it has helped to explain many things on my father's side of the family. I've lived kind of, in a sense, a dual life. Now I'm living this reality that I do have this, in a sense, this African American ancestry. In some ways, my family, this family story, had been hiding in plain sight with huge experts in the loop, like the great Carter G. Woodson, who was the second Black person in America to graduate from Harvard, who studied our family, was aware of them. So I started collecting books on that where our family were featured in. And when I got to about 20, I was just kind of overwhelmed by the idea that there was this whole other reality. And the irony of it is I had read other books by people who had had a similar experience, right? And was very empathetic towards them. I never knew that I would have that same experience as well. What's interesting about it too is that diving deep into that also helped me see more of, on my dad's mother's side of the family. That's really our musical tree. And so I can go back to my great-grandfather was a Louisiana fiddler, and then other members of the family were musicians as well, and so that kinda brings us, 5 generations later, we've just had all these musicians, that continue to this day, including my grandchildren.
That's amazing that musicianship continues and those roots are not just for the
Mhm.
past, but they're for the future
Yeah,
as
that's
well.
right, that's right.
You left home at 16, you got married at 18. You needed to really work, to struggle, to survive and make a life and to live and to provide for a marriage that early on.
Yeah.
How did that inform some of the music that you were making? I know that early on in your early days, you were playing 5-hour sets. You were doing something where there was a propulsion of music, getting people in a frenzy and dancing as you wrote.
That's right. That's right. That was when people went out to dance. Yeah, to live music, yeah. I saw my father do that. He got out of the Air Force Band and then had his own band and played on the weekends, and that's primarily how he provided for us. And then he had something called the GI Bill, which, paid for a college education out of being in the armed forces. And so he took advantage of that, went back to school and got a music degree and teaching credentials, but he still played. And so I knew that, okay, well, in my generation, it would look different than in his, but it was still the function of, like, I could either work 5 days a week washing dishes or work on Friday and Saturday night and make even more money on Friday and Saturday night playing for what were essentially dances at that time. So I started out doing that when I was, 14. So by the time I was 16 and 17, I knew, like, "Okay, I can do this every weekend." And in many ways, that and just the fact that I was willing to work multiple jobs made it so that I was able to, leave the house and begin to pursue my dream as a musician and also as a poet and a writer. I was in love with Andy, my girlfriend, and we both felt like at that time our homes were places that we needed to leave, that they weren't safe places, and we sort of trauma bonded together, and in many ways it made me a particular kind of musician, because it's like Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hours. I started putting that in when I was, just a very young teenager and was played in nightclubs up until the time that I was 21. I used to have to be escorted outside during by the bouncer during, in between the sets and stand outside the club, and wait until the break was over, and then I could go back in and play the next set, because I was underage. But it was interesting that California had this thing called the bandstand law. As long as you were on the bandstand, then you could play, but the moment that the break started, you had to go outside. As we tell this story and muse on the history past, I am not advocating for this as a life choice.
Hey friends, it's Joshua here, and I just want to take a quick moment to tell you about Shifting Culture Productions. If you've got a podcast, you're thinking about starting one, or you're dreaming up another creative venture, we're here to help bring your vision to life. From production and coaching to strategy and supports, we'll work alongside you to get your project off the ground and thriving. Let's partner together to create something impactful. To schedule a call and learn more about pricing, just email me at jjohnson@allnations.us. I'd love to hear about your ideas and see how we can make them happen. Let's create something amazing together. Reach out today. It worked out pretty well for you. You've had a pretty diverse and interesting life. Early on, I think it was probably a little rough. One of the things that you do write about is your search and the search of spirituality and learning and gleaning from different artists who were using art to focus on spirituality and spirituality to inform their artistry and art.
Absolutely.
And so what was that journey like for you early on
Yeah.
in your days as you were searching
Yeah.
to combine spirituality and artistry?
Well, today I am a professing Christian, so I'm a Christ follower and very committed to the Jesus story and stepping into it and following. And but in those days, there was spiritual eclecticism, looking at a lot of different, not only religions but different thinkers and philosophies, and doing a lot of kind of buffet spirituality, taste testing. So in many ways, when I was a teenager and started reading the Beats and reading people like Jack Kerouac and Gary Snyder and others, that reinforced in an artful way some of the spirituality that I knew from my grandparents and from going to Christian church, off and on, and a little bit of Sunday school and whatnot. So I had definitely had experience with the Christian church. I knew some of the hymnody, and even at one point sang as a young person, sang in the choir. My father was directing it. That was always residual. Jesus, I would say that Jesus was always present. I did not understand Jesus as savior, and I did not understand yet the idea that I was a person in need of a savior. So there were a lot of things that were being worked out. I think it was more that what I was feeling then as an 18-year-old or 19-year-old was that I believed that there was a God and that there was a spiritual component to reality. And there were a lot of people around me, especially musicians and writers, who were trying to understand that at the same time. And some people were coming to places of certainty. Others, like John Coltrane, the great tenor saxophonist that I admired a great deal. For him, reconciling it was that just sort of embracing everything, right? Because he was very troubled by the idea that there could be one way and that Jesus could be the exclusive way in our time to access God's love and forgiveness and direction. For a long time, I guess I would say I pretty much patterned myself after not so much Kerouac, because I saw that drugs and alcohol was sort of, destroying the gate in a sense to his Catholicism and making it very difficult for him to reconcile his own brokenness and in a sense always doing things that later he would regret. Whereas the poet Gary Snyder, who was a Pulitzer Prize winning poet, as a Zen Buddhist, he was more like the Wendell Berry of Zen, and so I saw in him like a new way of manhood as well. So a way to share something of the way my father perceived manhood, but also have this more introspective, tender, empathetic, and poetic side to who I wanted to be and spiritually. And so it wasn't until I encountered people outside of America that I began to see that, oh, well, there's Christian versions of this artfulness as well. There are people out there, whether it was Hans Rookmacher in the Netherlands, the Schaeffers, who are American expats that were in Switzerland, and others that kind of helped as guides as well. And then I met Steve Turner, a poet and writer who had been, writing about rock music since he was a teenager. And it just seemed like the people who had grown up on the Inklings and C.S. Lewis and all of that seemed to have a more fully orbed philosophy for what it would mean to have a Christian spirituality, where one was hoping for and seeking to be fully this Christ disciple, but also fully an artist, and not seeing any reason to build a wall between those. And in fact, seeing that the whole of life, day after day, would be this journey of hoping for seamless integration of the two.
As you started following Jesus and you have a place where, man, you could be a so-called Christian artist or you could be an artist that's a Christian. I wish at some day, like those two things were not different.
Oh,
There's
yeah.
not two different
Yeah.
things. Like it is like we're all these creative beings that could actually
That's right.
bring about some beautiful things into this world. But we do have this space of Christian artists. How did you find your way? What lane did you want to get into? Or as this improvisational artist that you are at times, you didn't want to be confined to a genre, and you haven't in your career. You've been defined by all sorts
Well,
of different
I've
things.
done my best to not be confined, though, there's not a day that goes by that people aren't trying to confine me by some particular decade of music or whatever it is. And I wish I could say I've made my peace with it, but I still haven't. Because like you, I'm not satisfied. I don't want to be complacent. I'm not satisfied with the fact that, we have to jump through these linguistic gymnastics routines, with the language, trying to help people understand that, okay, I think I know what you're talking about, and it seems like you're talking about a genre of music, and if you are, I'm not that. And there's a lot of that. Well, if you're not that, then what are you? Because you say that you're a Christian, so that makes you a Christian musician. It's like, well, only if we stay centered in Christ and we build the conversation around that. But if you're going to say that I'm a Christian musician and put me alongside others who say they're a Christian musician because they're part of a genre of music called Christian music, then we have a problem. And even more complicated is that I'm perfectly fine with those people naming themselves that. I'm just saying that for me, that's not my calling. And, well, what do you mean by that? And then you begin to explain that, well, that can't possibly be true of every person. As musicians, we could start out to say that in terms of the fellowship of people who follow Christ and the uses and enjoyment of music, I mean, are all the needs being met? We could look around and say, or is there a real gap in musicianship and a gap in the number of musicians needed to serve? Um, and if there were, then maybe you would say, you know what, I think my calling is to move towards the church and provide music for use and enjoyment there. But you might also say like, oh, it looks all full up, looks like got plenty of people there, so I think that I'll conduct the Boston Symphony, or I think that I'll create music for Saturday morning cartoons, or I will be the world's greatest jazz guitarist and, play in Japan and Europe and the Village Vanguard in New York City, So, yeah, I mean, there's just so many options and places to serve and to make the world that you want to live in, which is really what the calling is. How you find out the world you want to live in is getting direction from. For me, is getting direction from Christ in that way. God is not whispering in my ear, go left, go right, but there's plenty of testimony in creation and in the witness of Old and New Testaments and in the Jesus tradition that there's plenty to go on there, plenty of direction to extrapolate outward from.
That's beautiful. And I think that's helpful for people who are thinking about creating and being artists and walking in this way, that there are a buffet of options. I want to get into the creative aspect of music making. To me, it seems to be a dichotomy of a lot of solo work and then a lot of collaborative work of
Right. Yeah.
creation with music.
Yeah.
How does that work for you? Like, and where is the life that is breathed? Where does your soul come alive? Is it in the solo songwriting, like I'm writing in a page, I'm writing lyrics out? Is it the
Yeah.
editing booth in the editing bay, and
Right.
putting the music together? Is it playing with other people in the collaboration, or is it all of it? Like, and what
Yeah.
is the interplay between the individual and the collaboration?
Hey everyone, it's Joshua here. I want to take a quick moment to say thank you for being part of the Shifting Culture community. If you're enjoying the conversations we're having, it would mean the world to me if you would rate and review the podcast wherever you're listening. Your feedback not only helps others discover the show, but also keeps us inspired to bring you these impactful conversations. And if you're looking to dive even deeper, head on over to Substack at shiftingculture.substack.com, where you'll find extra insights, reflections, and more ways to engage with the topics that we explore here. Finally, if you believe in what we're doing and want to support the show, you can make a donation through the Support the Show link in the episode notes. Every contribution helps keep these important conversations alive. Thanks so much for listening and for being part of this journey to embody Jesus and impact the culture around us.
Well, just hearing you talk about it, I have to sort of confess the irony of that. I have to work at being collaborative. The little kid in me who could play for hours by himself, just in my imagination and a piece of cardboard. I'm still that person. Just hearing you frame that question, I realize I do work at it, and apparently I've done it a lot. Now that when I think about how much time, I've spent producing other people and that sort of collaboration, and then especially in the last 7 years, just building artistic collaborations, from the ground up, just as a one-off single or as an EP or an album. And I've done so much of that, and part of that is it's just fun for me. Becoming a record producer helped me see the importance of casting, and so I think in the last 7 years or so, the ability to be funded to cast to an artist and then create a song for that artist has been really, really interesting. There was a bass player that I always loved, and used to play some of his compositions when I was a young jazz musician. His name was Steve Swallow. And there are people like Steve that was a collaborator with Carla Bley for many years. And these, for some of your listeners, they may go, "Who are these people?" But these are very accomplished, though, kind of left of center jazz and improvisational artists. And so the ability to say, I want to do a song with Steve Swallow, who's one of the world's greatest bass players and an innovator, but really the precursor to Jaco Pastorius in some ways in terms of the way he played. And so I wrote a song specifically kind of in the style of the way that he has written and played, and we recorded that together. Or in the same way, I wanted to do something with the Turtle Island Quartet, which is a fantastic string quartet. And so I did piano and quartet recordings with them. And I wanted to do something with jazz trumpet player named Eddie Henderson and take kind of his vibe from the 70s and do the sort of cantaloupe, mix of rap and soul jazz from that era. So I've been able to just dream up these projects and cast people for them and then build the music around that. And that brings me a lot of pleasure. But as far as the the definitive answer, I would put that moment of like my recent recording, Every Kind of Uh-Oh. I would say there are songs on there, songs that I wrote with myself or with my son Sam. That's really the heart of me as an artist, that singer-songwriter. My hope is that the lyrics have a literary quality to them and that they work on a number of different levels and that people can enter into them, more superficially if needed, or they can really go, "Oh, we're really peeling the onion now," we're diving deeper and deeper. "Oh, okay, there's several things going on here." And so I would say that's at the heart of my artistry because that's what I learned from people like Joni Mitchell and Paul Simon and Jackson Brown and James Taylor. So those early singer-songwriters of that era, J.D. Souther, others like that. And then there's the part of me that is the experimental jazz part. And so I was both those teenagers. And so they both come out in different ways. And then sometimes they merge together. I think during the 80s and 90s, you would often hear them merge more when we were doing more pop music that was a hybrid of different influences, So even a song that people might know, like In the Light, started really as an homage to a South African band called Jaluka, and was also known as Savuka at one time as well, and a fellow by the name of Johnny Clegg. And he was a white South African who was fronting, a mixed race band during apartheid. And so the music of In the Light was really born from the grooves of that music. Even though it's a song that can be played in many different styles, that's really where it started. And that's just the way it's been for me from the beginning. I mean, as soon as I've started diving into the world of jazz, immediately have to get to West Africa. And then, of course, all these years later, the irony of it being is that, 5% of my ancestry is still, West African. So it's just, there you go. You can't make this stuff up, you know.
Let's go to In the Light, the song that you wrote. You have on your album Love Life, great song, and then DC Talk covered it and made it pretty popular. A lot of people have quoted it. I think it's in your book. Billy Graham quoted it, the Pope. And so, how does that sit with you as you see the song evolve? You write it, you put it out, and then someone else takes it, and then even the lyrics get put out there in speeches of Billy Graham and others. They take these lyrics. What is it like for you as a songwriter then to see the evolution of that song?
Yeah, I mean, all you can really do is you have two responses. I mean, you can make it about ego and about you, or you can realize that this is you're now participating in the great cosmic gift economy, and it's just all gift. The song was free when I got it. I like to think that part of my work is to play with the deep genetics, the deep DNA of the cosmos music in terms of sound and pitch and timbre and all of that. And in terms of the importance of word, Christianity, the act of following Jesus is a word-based endeavor. We speak of Jesus as the Word, and so the idea that I get to vocationally combine these two things, these two really cosmically important, essential things in terms of the music of the cosmos, the word of the cosmos, and to play with them in an earthly sense and to live hopefully in obedience and as one who's greatly loved and full of hope for the future. To put a song out there into the world and have it travel around the world and be able to get royalty statements that see like all the different countries that the song is in and that people are still singing that song 30 plus years later, probably, in a concert this weekend, and it'll get sung depending on which, bands, because I think there's several different bands that that do the song in their repertoire, including the obvious, like Toby Mac. And I think at one point, I think even the Newsboys were doing it. Yeah, I'm just grateful. That's all I can say. I'm just grateful for any song well, first of all, I'm grateful just to be able to write a song, but I'm grateful for any song that goes and finds a home in the hearts of people and places and sort of fulfills the function of created things, which is use and enjoyment, which is the model that we see in creation. As I've said many times, we can observe a tree in the forest as an incredible work of God's artistic hand. And so we can enjoy it. And then we can also use that same tree to craft a guitar, to make music, or to build shelter. So to me, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to just echo that in my own small way, that what I make is made of use and enjoyment.
Yeah, you've created music. You produced a lot of music with a lot of different artists. You've collaborated with a lot of different artists. What is special about creating music with your son Sam and doing that, even though that you've created music with lots of different people? What is the
Yeah.
specialness of creating with your own son?
Creating with your children is amazing. I've had the opportunity to create with both my kids, and Molly is my daughter, my oldest child. I pretty much don't do any writing that I don't let her read. That's how much I value her opinion. With Sam, there's so much about Sam and I that we are very different in terms of the way we came up musically, but we're so much alike genetically too. So like we have the ability to sort of complete each other's sentences. So, I mean, I've had a lot of great collaborators, but I can't imagine it being easier to collaborate with someone other than my son. He grew up listening to my music, so in a sense, he's been there from the beginning. The first music he ever heard was probably his father's music, and so he has that vocabulary to draw on, but he also has his own generational vocabulary that he draws upon. That too is just an incredible gift for which I'm very grateful. Functionally, some listeners might like to know, well, how does that work? In the most recent collaboration with Sam, it was more about the 3 songs that we did on Every Kind of Uh-Oh, was more about me coming with sort of reams of lyrics written and having the framework of a song, but wanting to hear what Sam would do harmonically from the guitar standpoint. And so maybe I could say, well, it feels like it's a minor key or it's a major key, uh, and and it's feeling right in key of F or D or whatever it might be. So maybe we just kind of start there and let's go. But it's really it is very improvisational. Sam could start playing. I could start singing immediately. He might suggest, hey, what if we went a little bit of a departure out of the key center for a second here, and I'll go to a flat third there, and you can still sing the A over the top of that, and be like, yeah, 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 that's a great idea. Okay, yeah. So we stop and talk for a minute, but then it's mostly just very organic. Again, like finishing each other's sentences.
I think that's just fascinating to be able to be in that space, to be able to finish someone's sentences. What do you look for as a producer, as you're producing someone else's music, and what are you trying to pull out? And how does that different than producing and creating your own music? What are you looking for? What are you observing and what are you trying to pull out?
Well, I think it's important to tell the listeners that music production is a vocation, calling, but it's also a craft. For some people, it's a job, and they're grateful to have it, but they maybe don't have the ability or the privilege to sort of choose what they want to work on, right? And so for them, it might be, and even I would say for me too, when I was just starting out, I just wanted to be in the studio making something. And so a lot of the bigger philosophical questions they had to stay in the shadows more. Maybe it was just a matter of like, I have 4 hours to record 2 songs on this person for a 45 RPM single, and if I don't get it done in that amount of time, it starts cutting into the money that I'm gonna get paid, and so, it really could be as simple as that, but of course, that was 45 years ago. Today, it would be a lot more like what you're hinting at, where I would be thinking like, what is it that I can contribute that will be helpful to this artist, that will cause them to grow and mature, that might cause them to have a kind of cultural shift in terms of people warming to their music, people being more receptive? Are the things that I can add? Do I have an kind of added value here? I tend to ask those questions first because I don't want to find myself in a place where I'm replicating work that someone else might more easily do. I like to feel like, you know what, I am the right person for this job. I'm going to get this done in a way that my neighbors wouldn't. They would get it done differently, uh, but this is a moment where I can make a unique contribution. So I feel like that's important. I feel like that when I was a younger producer, it was like, well, maybe I'll never get another chance to make another record. And, would put my whole self in, and you over influence projects in the beginning, and you have to learn to like continually just incrementally take yourself out and then insert just a sliver of this part of your artistry because it's what's needed. I feel like that's the maturity that is meant to happen as a music producer. So that's why I say it's very unique in that, if you were to slice up someone's talent into 100 slices and you'd look at a potential project and say, yeah, I think I can contribute. It's like I think slices 17, 22 and 90, are really, if I input those into this project, it's going to lift this project, but it's not going to be heavy handed. It's not going to feel like, oh, that's a Charlie Peacock record. It's going to start to just feel like, oh, wow, that was really cool to have Charlie work on the project because it did elevate the sonics of the project, the songwriting, the performances, things like that reach and touch people emotionally.
Can you give me an example of a project that you've worked on that your influence wasn't too heavy-handed, that you felt like this is the right thing for the right time, and it elevated the project?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, the biggest project in the last decade or so would, of course, be all the Civil War songs that I produced and the multiple records. So that would be in many ways, I mean, they got me at a good time because, I have matured to that point. So I really was the right person to produce that music because I could analyze what was needed and touch it without destroying it or putting too much of my own influence on the music. And so there's a lot of my influence there, but it's so nuanced and such tiny little slices that you would have to know me very, very well, probably. Have know pretty much everything I'd ever worked on, I think, to go, oh, okay, I see he borrowed that little trick he did, on 33 albums spec, and did that. So there's things like that are in there. I'm not saying they're not in there, but that would be an example of that. And then early on, it would be like when I was producing the 77s record, All Fall Down, which I think is a great pop and rock album. But definitely there were songs that there was this sense that they were trying to find their way, and then part of it was that Michael Rowe is just an encyclopedia of rock and roll music, particularly electric guitar. And yet they were at a time when there were these bands that they loved and enjoyed that were kind of poppy too, right? And I was so much more in that realm in terms of indie alternative pop music that incorporated live performance with programming. And because, I was on the front end of having the first Lindrum, having first Mac software for sequencing and all of that kind of stuff. I would say that on that record, like if you listen to a song like Ba 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 on that, which was kind of us making a pop single, I would say that's and Michael Rowe and the rest of the guys would probably say the same thing, that's very, very Charlie Peacock influence. I mean, the listener might go, "Oh, I'm cool with that." And, but if you were thinking like, "Oh, I just want to hear, a guitar player, a bass player, a drummer, and a keyboardist play live," that wasn't that. That was much more the studio as laboratory and the whole, realm of experimentation that began, with George Martin and the Beatles.
It felt like, hey, you had some new toys to play with. You wanted to play.
That's right. Well, of course.
Yeah.
We had a lot of records to ruin with all those new toys.
That's right. That's right. One of the things that I noticed throughout your book, it seems to me that you were making amends, a lot of amends along the way, and asking for forgiveness for things that have happened. Seems like the music business is a people business. Sometimes you just love it just to be a music business, but you have to deal with people. So what has been the role of forgiveness, and how has forgiveness helped you along the way?
I was unfortunate to have a drug and alcohol abuse problem at one point. I was fortunate to meet, a community of 12 steppers, recovery group. And such a big part of recovery programs are making amends, to recognizing your faults, your character defects, and going to people and saying, "Hey, look, I know I did this to you and I was wrong and I ask your forgiveness." And I'm open to talking about it more specifically if you need to. And I want to hear from you too. So that's a posture that I didn't know about. And then shortly thereafter, within a year and a half or so, is when I had my encounter with Jesus and hearing the Jesus story in a fresh way. I was already sort of set up to understand the idea of amends, and then the idea that, that there could be God coming towards me in the person of Jesus saying, "I will make these amends for you." So it didn't make me any less responsible. It doesn't make me any less responsible today to keep short accounts with people and to make amends. But it, again, as I said earlier about the music, it put things in a cosmic perspective. And so I could have my local, earthbound practice of it too, but there was this cosmic sense that all amends had been made, and now it was about being a certain kind of person in the world. And it was about being a person who had a willingness to accept responsibility for their actions, to say that I have transgressed the law of my heart and the law of this God that I claim to follow. And then that puts me in a posture of the need of forgiveness, admitting that, and then the coming to, in particular, wronging against people, just being able to say to them that practice, ongoing practice of like, I was wrong, I did you wrong, and or I did this specific thing, and I ask your forgiveness. I don't know. Just for me, that's just been a part of, I guess, my mental health program is that I try to keep short accounts with people. And when I haven't had the opportunity, try to just look for that opportunity. I've really purposely stayed in touch with people, for 50 plus years, sometimes just connecting with them just to make sure that they know that I know what I did and I'm sorry. And even just in writing Roots and Rhythm, as I was writing, I was realizing, oh, this is an opportunity to say that I was wrong and that I'm sorry.
If people would then pick up Roots and Rhythm, which is a fantastic book, I love the way that you write, and almost as an improvisational way of of you're blending stories together, and one story leads to another, and you're moving through it. It just feels like I'm sitting around a fire with you telling stories.
Oh,
And
good. I'm so
it's a
glad to hear that.
great
Uh,
book, well written.
Thank you.
And I'm
Thank
sure
you.
it took a lot of work to be able to craft even
Yes.
that there.
Yes,
And
I had some good help, from some crafty editors. Yeah.
that's
But
good.
I'm so glad though that that stays there because early on before I was told don't tell people that, I would say I'm writing a book about epistemology, about how we know what we know,
Yeah.
and specifically how I know what I know. And of course, this they just people warn me only because they just wanted people to read the book and not be, say, well, what is epistemology? And, I thought he was a musician. I want to hear stories about musicians and music and my favorite songs and stuff. Uh, but for me, I felt like the book was also a way of showing the providential hand of God and the interconnectedness of everything, the non neutrality of the life that we live here on earth. And so I did want it to be as if I were improvising, like, okay, here's an idea, da, 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 da. Moving on to the next idea over here, and here's another idea. But showing that, oh, they're sort of seamlessly integrated. They're moving from one to another as if that's exactly the way history just poured out, right?
And you did a fantastic job. And so I said, what you wanted to accomplish, you did.
Thank
And
you.
I
Thank
really,
you.
really enjoyed it. I want
Thank you.
everybody to go out and get Roots and Rhythm because I know you're going to enjoy this book. And Charlie, I have a couple questions, quick questions here at the end.
Okay.
I like to ask one, if you go back to your 21-year-old self, what advice would you give?
Slow down, buddy. There's a lot of life left to live. Slow down your anxiety about accomplishing things quickly. Listen to the wisdom people around you. Don't trust your gut so much. There seems to be in every generation there's a word that travels on the wind that is like just trust yourself. And I think there's a part of that sort of blink kind of thing of like an intuitive part that yeah, there is a trusting that needs to be there. And there can be a trusting too, just based on, living long enough and having enough experiences. But there's also a place to say, you know what, I don't even know what I don't know. And and I need to slow down and listen more. And when someone takes the time to say, hey, can I sit with you for a minute? Let me share something with you and tell you something. That you really take that to heart. That because I know now that if I do that with someone, I it's serious. I'm not just looking to insert myself into people's lives, right? So I think I would definitely tell myself that there were people that God in his great kindness provided to me to warn me of things, to tell me things, to try to direct me that not only ignored, but I maybe spoke very ill of as well.
Yeah, that's good. That's helpful. That's helpful advice for everyone walking through life. That's good. Anything you've been reading, watching, or listening to lately you could recommend?
Oh my gosh, this is where I need to have my iPad. Here's what I'll say that I've been doing, and then people can go from there. But one of the things that I've been doing is going back and looking at some of the new American history that has been written over the last, say, 10 years. Like there might be a new book out on the American Revolution or something, or the state of California. And just looking at what new scholars are saying in the light of bringing more people to the table to be voices of history. So that's been a real interest to me. I just recently also have a book that I just read that is basically a American history through the Black experience, and and so that's a very interesting take as well. And I want to do that. Like for example, where I come from in Northern California, um, much of Northern California was built on the backs of not only the indigenous population, but on the Chinese as well. And so I want to spend some time studying that culture, why the Chinese immigrated, were there government programs for it, for workers, what was going on with that. I want to know more about that, because I come from a small town that has a Chinese cemetery, right? So these are significant things. I grew up with a Bacchae parade every year. We had a Buddhist temple in our little town. So these are things that interest me to understand more about why things happen the way they happen. So I would say most of my reading is right now all in that realm. Yeah, I've probably read 10 American history or California history specific books in the last 6 weeks.
There you go. Amazing. Charlie, I think people go out, get Roots and Rhythm. It's fantastic. You can go out and
Yes,
get it
thank
anywhere
you.
books
Please
are
support it.
sold, and
That's
support
right.
that. Buy a bunch of copies for your friends and hand them out that you would like to point people to.
Well, they can always find me on Substack. I write on there. So Charlie Peacock on Substack if you want to read my newsletter and join up. And for those of you who are looking like, okay, I want Charlie's discography. I want to know how to find all the music he's worked on. Go to charliepeacock.com. All that information is always there and available to you.
Perfect. Well, Charlie, thank you for sitting down and talking with me today. I love this conversation, walking through some of the roots and then the music of your life, and walk through some of this creative process and what does spirituality have to do with the creative and creating music and art. How we could actually do this on our own. How could we do it collaboratively? What does it look like to do it with family as well? And how we could actually observe and see the beauty of God in all of
Mhm.
life as we're
Yeah.
walking through this world. It was a fantastic conversation. I love talking to you.
Thank you.
So
Well,
thank you
you're a
so
great
much.
interviewer, Joshua. Thank you so much. All right. Take care.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you want to see more episodes like this, go to patreon.com/shiftingculture and become a monthly patron of the show. You can help us produce more episodes so that we can see the body of Christ look more like Jesus. If you become a patron on patreon.com/shiftingculture, you will get early access to episodes. You will get episode guides. You will get bonus shows, hopefully, and more. So go to patreon.com/shiftingculture and become a monthly patron. Also, leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps us out and helps us find new listeners to the show. And just go and share this podcast with your friends, your family, your network, people that you think would enjoy it as well. Thank you again for listening to the show. I hope you have a great week.